Get them done and get them done in a timely fashion. The first one will be a City Council briefing, the Human Rights Commission Annual Report. Raj, we welcome you.
Hey, Raj.
I think everyone should have one of these copies of our annual report. Thank you, Mayor Sessoms, Vice Mayor Jones, actually not here, other member of the council, and of course, Mr. Hanson. So let's get started. The HRC acts as an advisor to City Council and continues to be the advocate for the human rights of Virginia Beach citizens and residents. In the past several years, we have strived to pull away from any perception of this commission being a rubber stamp commission. We have shown that we are a commission that is active and vibrant, and we are very engaged with all aspects of our community, region, and state. We read the pulse of the city very well, to quote Teresa Stanley, one of our commissioners here. The HRC, in partnership with the Beach Community Partnership and the Department of Housing and Neighborhood Preservation, hosted the National Homelessness Memorial Day Candlelight Vigil on Monday, December 21st, 7 p.m. at Lighthouse Center. Donated food and clothing items such as cotton socks, scarves, hats, and gloves were collected and distributed to people struggling with homelessness. See some of the good pictures we have there. Building bridges, and this is one of our mainstays that we have. It's born out of an HRC community conversation called the Pastor's Leaders Table, and has made great strides towards building trust between the community and also the Virginia Beach Police Department. This group is made up of pastors, citizens, and community leaders, as well as Virginia Beach Police Department leadership and officers. They have been meeting for over 2 years and have remained at the table through tense and frank conversations. 4 initial goals were developed, and the group has reached tangible results on every one of them. Addressing transparency through a data collection system, increasing minority representation in law enforcement professions, implementing community police mediation programs, improving community and police relations. Commissioners will remain at the table as this group expands their focus from their 4 initial goals to identifying new areas that could be improved. As far as communication letters to council, as part of our mission, we act as acting as an advisory capacity to the City Council on the human rights issues. The HRC wrote several letters this year, this past fiscal year. Letters to City Councils highlight the need for diversity on circuit court bench and asking City Council to carry out the HRC's concerns on the General Assembly. Letters emphasizing the HRC's continued support of the Let's Open Doors program. Letters urging Council to conduct an inclusive disparity study for the City of Virginia Beach. Also, support of the dedication of the Virginia Beach Boulevard in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. The HRC also wrote several letters to other organizations and individuals, as well as an op-ed to Virginia Pilot. And several commissioners have also done interviews on television, radio, and print. Through work with the Gay Straight Alliance, or GSA, clubs, the commission was made aware of concerns surrounding the Cox High School GSA Assembly and sent a letter expressing their support for Cox's GSA and all Virginia Beach City Public School GSA clubs. As a part of their commitment to educate the community and advocate for the human rights of all, the HRC wrote an editorial piece to the Virginia Pilot with highlighted the need for continuous action in response to hate, prejudice, and injustice. We wrote a letter to Sheriff Stolley in response to his request for a legal opinion from the city attorney in regards to the sheriff's obligation to provide mental health services. The letter also highlighted the partnership between the HRC and the Virginia Beach Sheriff's Department to advocate for inmates with mental health issues and incarcerated in the Virginia Beach Jail. Also, a letter to Dr. Aaron Spence, Superintendent of the City of Virginia Beach Public Schools, requesting a liaison to the HRC from the school system. On April 6th at 7 p.m., the HRC held its 23rd Annual Human Rights Award ceremony at the Virginia Beach Convention Center. Over 180 people were in attendance for that. We had Kathy Lewis from who's the host of Hearsay with Kathy Lewis, and she was our keynote speaker. Youth Poet Laureate Diana Z. Lee shared one of her original works. Vanessa Torres from the Norfolk FBI office, who's also their community outreach specialist, served as the mistress of ceremonies. Also, we had an entertainment, we had Tallwood High School's string quartet there. The HRC, the Human Rights Awards recipients were, Caritas Felices de Hampton Roads, Marilyn Castro, Loretta Kahn, Victoria Milosevic, NAMI, the Virginia Beach chapter, and Nancy Will. The Daniel M. Stone Humanitarian Award went to Virginia Beach Justice Initiative. The Myra E. Obendorf Human Rights Achievement Award in Government was Dr. Amelia Ross Hammond. And the Helen P. Shropshire Youth Award went to Teens with a Purpose. So commissioners on the HRC also toured the mental health facilities at the Beach Jail and did a walkthrough review of services and the atmosphere in the jail. Each commissioner observed and provided verbal report to the commission after the visit, addressing certain things like interactions with correctional officers, inmates, living conditions, rehab activities and programs, as well as possible signs of discrimination towards the inmate population. This year during College Beach Week, or Week 17, several commissioners experienced firsthand the atmosphere of the oceanfront with large crowds, packed roads and highways, and fortunately a few violent outbursts by visitors and citizens. In lieu of presenting a report to City Council regarding the Commission's observances, the HRC established an oceanfront work group and has been working with city leaders and members of the community to formalize suggestions. We are also in partnership with the Resort Advisory Commission. And this created the first joint working group between two different commissions. And this is so that we ensure that we're not working in a silo, that we're actually doing things outside of just the HRC's roles and making sure that we have the best positive outcome for this oceanfront working group. Thank you, Councilman Earn, for your support. And of course, community partnerships. The Virginia Beach Police Department's humanitarian ribbon was created and adopted on May of 2017. It will be given in partnership with the Virginia Beach Human Rights Commission, awarded to any member of the Department of Police or other law enforcement agency for any act or achievement as determined by the HRC to be above which is normally required or expected, and which materially or conceptually promotes cultural diversity, social awareness, equal opportunity, and human rights in our community. And this was a big deal because also police department helped change their policies to ensure that this was included. And the hope is that this will also be a future platform for other departments in the city. The HRC has a strong partnership with the LGBTQ community and Hampton Roads Pride. Commissioners take part in activities throughout the year, including Pride Fest, the LGBTQ Muslim Allyship Forum, the Love is Love, a celebration of Gay Straight Alliance event at Cox High School, the Vibe District Paint the Pavement event, and the LGBT Town Hall regarding law enforcement rights and safety. And currently all Hampton Roads police departments, Hampton Roads area police departments now have an LGBT liaison due to the drive of our commissioners. The Sheriff's Department, as far as of February 2017, is we have only the city of Norfolk at this time that has an LGBT liaison, but our hope is that our city will follow soon after. On May 3rd, Commissioners Amberman and Stanley appeared on the WHRO talk show Hearsay with Kathy Lewis to discuss immigration in the Hampton Roads area. Commissioner Stanley shared a project supported by the HRC and founded by the Hands United Building Bridges, or HUB, that provides welcoming signs to our community. The signs are in 6 different languages: Spanish, English, Arabic, Hebrew, and French, and Somali, and say, no matter where you are from, we are glad you're our neighbor. One of the objectives of the HRC is to provide assistance to persons who believe their rights have been violated. The Commission accomplishes this by identifying appropriate federal, state, or local agencies that can address the complaint and by referring the person to the appropriate agency. This chart right here is a breakdown of the 20 inquiries the HRC received this last fiscal year. And you can see most of it's revolving around employment. Also, the HRC has played an integral role as a leader and advocate in an effort to shape the landscape of the Virginia Beach community. Members of the Human Rights Commission attend, organize, and participate in numerous events throughout the year. The Commission reaches beyond borders of Virginia Beach to partner with other state human rights organizations. Through this partnership with the Virginia Association for Human Rights, or VAHR, the HRC was instrumental in the adoption of a resolution to encourage the fair and equitable treatment of immigrants and refugees by the federal government. We're also fortunate to have 2 members of our commission that serve as officers on the VAHR. That's Commissioners Vivian Blaze and Commissioner Cliff Rice. The Commission remains active and committed to the advancement of human rights for the residents of the City of Virginia Beach and throughout Virginia. And I also want to take this time to thank our liaison, who we couldn't do anything without, really, and that would be Kathy Henson, and also our 2 council liaisons, Shannon Kane and Bobby Dyer as well. So, do we have any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. We do. Jim Wood?
Thanks. So, Raj, what do you see as the as your biggest challenges or opportunities going forward?
Biggest challenges, I would say, is ensuring that we have every segment of the population out there when we do our either our group forums or other events, that folks are coming in together and with an open mind. We can't just have just minority groups and those who are always feeling some sort of pressure without the majority there as well, speaking and having honest, positive dialogue.
Bobby D?
Yeah, and I just want to say that, to compliment the entire commission for their time and dedication. In today's world, they deal with very, very, very sensitive issues, and they deal with it in a classy, congenial way, very proactive way. And, I can't say enough about not only do they show up at the meetings, but all the other things that they do, all the other events that they go to. They really do walk the walk, and I think on behalf of everybody, really want to give a profound thank you to everybody for not only what you do, what you have done, but will continue to do.
Thank you, Bobby. Any other comments?
A couple of our commissioners here, Teresa Stanley, Vivian Blaze, Michael Berlucci, and also B. Amberman.
And we thank all of y'all for coming down today, and we thank you for what you do with this wonderful organization. I couldn't help but look at the letters to the city council and everything I think you asked for, you got. So you're doing it the right way. So I wish I could be that successful with the council. I'll tell you that right now. But thank y'all very much for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Raj.
Okay, we'll move on now to city managers' briefings. You want to make those introductions,
Yes, sir. I'd
Mr.
love to. So, Council, we're going to present to you today a series of briefings, kind of little groupings. We're going to start out with transition area. Barry Frankenfield's going to present to you a information briefing. As soon as they get it up, and they got it up,
It's
so
up.
Barry's rolling.
It's up.
Barry, we're glad you're here.
All right, well, thank
and
you very
enjoyed being
much.
with you yesterday.
Yeah, right. Thank you. This is a briefing that was given to the Transition Area and Interfacility Traffic Area Committee on June 1st, and they requested that we bring that forward to council for your information and consideration. There's no actions related to this. It's primarily information. We also briefed the Planning Commission on July 12th, and now we're briefing you today. The presentation is pretty much the same overall. I'd like to point out we have Dr. Karen Kwasny here from the Planning Commission, who has been very supportive and interested in this effort, and she serves both on the Planning Commission and on the ITA committee.
We're glad to have you here today.
There you go. I got somebody pushing the buttons for me. All right. So transition area we call it the TAITA. So if you need an acronym, here's another one. It was established in 2013. It advises City Council as well as aids in communications with residents and businesses and monitors the implementation of public projects. This is the list of the members. I'm not going to read them all to you, but Linwood Branch is the chair. Councilwoman Henley is ex officio member, and Dr. Karen Kwasny is also ex officio on the group. The rest of the representatives are basically representing the farming community, or they are representing various civic leagues of the area. All right, so we have a much more slimmed down, not that I'm slim, but a slimmed down cast of presenters today. We had a variety of people who presented. We're unfortunately, you just have to listen to me today. Maybe that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. But we do have some of the people in the room here. In case you have a difficult question, I'm going to refer you to them. So Nancy McIntyre is here from DSC. CJ Bodner is going to actually do a little presentation on stormwater. Jenny McPherson is here doing RPA, and Dr. Peter Pomerak is here from Public Utilities. Greg Johnson was here. Or he's out in the hallway. If we need him, we'll call him in. And Robert Davis is here representing, where's Robert? Maybe he's sitting out in the hall. Robert, okay, he's representing the transition area.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you all for being here. Okay, a little history. This is one of the few things that's been around longer than I have here. It's been around since 1979 in the comprehensive plan. The concept of changing the level of development, the type of development, and transitioning development south of what is now known as the Green Line really started in 1979. A combination of that concept and limitation of the urban service boundary for water and sewer, I think, is probably one of your significant land use policies that has really changed the way the city has developed, and it has been for the best. Between 1979 and 1985, the Green Line, which is shown on this map as the red line, I'm going to try to confuse you, but so it doesn't go together, shown as the red line, is the ITA and Princess Anne Road area, and that map is shown absolutely correctly. So in 1985, the name Green Line came about. And so at that point, it identified the beginning of the transition area. Originally, there was three. You can go to the next slide. Originally, there were three transition areas. Then along 1991, they were combined into one. One of the key concepts of the transition area, in addition to the guidelines of development, green space, recreation, trails, quality development, and lower density, was that the development would pay for itself with its tax revenues. Eventually, these three areas were combined into one. And in 1997, we started to go into a little more detail as far as the guidelines. We developed a matrix, so you don't automatically get the 1 unit per acre. You have to meet certain elements: recreational amenities, open space, quality of design, quality of development. But the concept of 1 unit per acre and 50% open space has endured from 1979 to today. That really is a very consistent policy that has been throughout, and that's developable acres. It's not total acres. A big change happened in 2003 and 2009. Go back one. 2003 and 2009, and that's the BRAC amendments created the ITA, also known as the Interfacility Traffic Area, and a detailed set of design guidelines were included for the transition area. 2009 and 2011, we developed the ITA Master Plan and Vicinity Plan, which started to define what happened to the ITA area. Since then, most of the ITA and the Rock Church property was acquired. We are going through another update of the ITA plan. As I said yesterday, we don't usually like to redo a plan every 5 years, but in this case, when you over double the amount of acreage that the city owns in that time, it's reasonable to go ahead and relook at the plan. The big changes in 2015 and 2016, we developed the transition area guidelines, and I have a note here that says, hold up the plan. which I don't have it. Oh, here it is, which was developed in 2015, which was the detailed guidelines for the transition area. New policies were developed. They were supported by the Planning Commission, and they were included in the 2016 Comprehensive Plan. And this is all you ever need to know about it. If you can figure out what every line does and defines everything, you have the transition area, you have the ITA, you have Princess Anne Common overlapping, but you are at the STAR. You are at the Municipal Center, which shows you the relationship. We are right on the frontier of the transition area and the gateway to the southern part of the city. No policy, no land use regulations exists by its own. As part of that effort, the ARP was tied in, the Agricultural Reserve Program was tied in very closely to assure that the transition area and the change of development was appropriate and supported property owners. It was approved in 1995. Originally, the transition area was not included in those guidelines. And just jumping ahead over the years, it was included in 2005, but from a policy standpoint, very few, if any, I think one, came through to you for consideration. We did an analysis of, you can go to the next one, because that's the one. We did an analysis this year of what properties were available for development in the transition area. Of 5,900 acres in the transition area, there are 605 acres that we have identified that are possible for development, which means they also are possible for potential ARP properties. Wait, that's not exactly right. They are potential ARP properties. There are smaller properties that could be potential for development. Thank you for looking at me funny, so I say it right. But there is a significant opportunity, 605 acres in the transition area that now identified for ARP, or clearly identified for ARP. In your recent budget, FY 17-18, you supported and approved 0.34 cents of tax revenue to be used in the transition area for ARP. So the most, what makes the ARP work is the public utilities. So public utilities, what is not, does not service by public utilities, that's that yellow beige area. The rest of it is serviced by public utilities. The significant, to me, boundary is what I call the water and sewer service boundary. That's that blue line. That is Indian River Road and Newbridge Road. That is the line that water and sewer do not jump across. That makes a major change in how we do development. And so as we do these public utilities projects, and Dr. Peter Pomeroy is here in case we have any questions, but basically you see what the boundary is. We extend water and sewer services. It's logical, it's coordinated, it's constructed to public utility standards. It is dedicated back to the city, and there's potential cost participation when the public benefit exists for future development. No different than any other development that we do. This is exactly, just happens to be in this area, but every developer pays for those utilities, extends them, cost participation when appropriate. There are two public works CIP projects, and they are Princess Anne Road Phase 7 and Indian River Road, Princess Anne Road intersection improvements that are proposed for the area. Both are under design. Both are not funded for full improvements. Princess Anne Road intersection is Indian River Road and Princess Anne Road, and there's two options that we've identified for that, and that's a roundabout as well as a signalized intersection option. Again, they are not funded for construction. And the other project is Princess Anne Road Phase 7A, and that is for safety improvements, shoulder widening, drainage improvements, utility relocations. The last part I'm going to talk about, of course, CJ is going to get up and tell you all about stormwater, is that in the comprehensive plan in 2016, there was one paragraph in there that said all projects in the southern watershed will meet minimum design standards for stormwater. They will be reviewed by city staff, and then when it goes to Planning Commission, they will not go forward unless staff is able to assure the Planning Commission and ultimately Council that we have had an extensive review of those projects and feel confident that once the project is designed, it can be built to the density and the quality that they have identified, and the stormwater regulations can be addressed. These are the items that we basically look into. It's required for all the projects in the southern watershed. That's difficult to read. It's basically Princess Anne Road, Dam Neck Road, a little bit north of that, but it is a big part of the city. So the required information focuses more than what we used to ask for: site and soil conditions, elevations, groundwater, tailwater, and has preliminary stormwater design, calculations, locations, and types of BMP. So PMP. So the staff reviews those, and they recommend whether or not it can go forward. This is the additional expense. However, assuming the project goes forward, it is a much reasonable approach for the developers to take, and we have found in many situations the project has been much more reasonable and doable because they've spent this time up front. So those projects are done before the Planning Commission. CJ is going to give you a little overview of the stormwater issues. The same thing, as if you haven't heard enough about stormwater, but stormwater issues and how they relate to the transition area and how we look at that in a little more detail. And it also shows to be a very important partnership between the Planning Department and Public Works, as well as Public Utilities, on how we approach development in this area. So come on. Jonathan, I'll push the slides for you. I'm stealing yours? Okay. You're going to use mine?
We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to give you all everything you need to know about stormwater in 5 minutes or less.
Well,
It's not going to happen,
we can
but I will
put
do
you
what best I
put
can.
you
This was just so you know, for ITA, this was a 20-minute presentation. We're cutting it down to 5 to be able to try to give you just the gist of what you need to know. One of the things we need to look at, as Barry said, was regarding the comprehensive plan. We put in requirements regarding you have to provide certain information, and we're going to go over some of those requirements here, talking about design storms, recurrence intervals. When you hear about the 100-year storm event, that's not a storm that happens once every 100 years. That's a storm that has a 1% chance of occurring any time that there's a storm event. So you can get multiple, as we saw last fall, multiple 100-year storms or greater storms in the course of a year. We also need to know what type of soil types, because some soils will infiltrate water better than other soils. That needs to be accounted for if some of the BMP options are going to be an infiltration type measure. We need to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit more about rainfall distribution here in a minute. I've got a slide for that. But the depth of the groundwater also impacts what BMPs you can use. And we'll talk about tailwater a little bit more here in a minute. When we talk about hydraulic standards, we're talking about the pipe system that conveys the water. We're talking about, does the system have capacity to be able to convey a 10-year storm event, which is the requirements of the Public Works standards and specs. We also are stressing to the development community that there needs to be a consistency in the methodology between how you calculate your pre-developed runoff and your post-developed runoff. Because some measures are a little more conservative. They say there's more rain that will occur during a storm event. If you use that for your pre-developed and then you use a different method for your post-development, it makes it real easy to show your post-development at your pre-developed level. One of the things we're stressing is to remember the past by looking to the future. Sometimes the farm field that's being proposed to be developed floods, as it's shown in this picture. That's very important because it creates de facto storage on site. You're not discharging as much water from the site as could be shown in a calculation. That needs to be calculated in their calculations when they submit their plans. We want to look at what changes might happen as precipitation patterns change. And also we want to make sure the development's resilient now and in the future as sea level rise occurs. So when we're talking about rainfall patterns, we do see a change in rainfall patterns. Peter had worked up a little document showing how the pattern seems to be changing. Seems to be more rain that falls in a given storm event. We have Dewberry actually working on a study for us to look at future precipitation patterns. And for example, right now the 10-year 24-hour storm is 5.48 inches. Well, with the pattern that we're seeing, maybe that needs to be 6.5 or 7. And that's what we're going to look to the Dewberry study to determine, do we need to account for this? So we make sure the 10-year system that we're getting isn't a 3-year system when it's installed. We need to point out to people that just because there's flooding downstream, all downstream flooding is not equal. If we're flooding a forested or a wetland area, that's not going to be as bad as if we're flooding a roadway. And if we continue to let the roadway flood, we all end up in a very catastrophic situation for flooding that is occurring. We need to know our boundaries. We need to use actual data when we have it. Department of Public Works has partnered with USGS. We have 10 rain gauges and also tide gauges stationed throughout the city. Those tide gauges allow us to know what the elevation of the water is every 5 minutes. So we can go to look at that chart, be able to see what the water elevation is, and be able to use the actual tailwater conditions that's occurring during a storm event instead of setting a set number and say that's what you have to use. We need to take into account, especially in the southern rivers, wind tides. We all know about wind tides. We've seen them occur, and it doesn't take a weatherman, to quote Bob Dylan, it doesn't take a weatherman to know which way the wind blows in the southern rivers. When it's blowing from the south, it pushes the water up into Back Bay. It doesn't let it go towards Oregon Inlet, creates a high tailwater condition. That needs to be accounted for in the design of the projects. Also, when you look at the water, you need to, if it's planned for infiltration, is the groundwater where we actually think it is? We've seen projects where they said the groundwater was 8 feet in the ground, but there's a borrow pit across the street, and that borrow pit is sucking the water down to a lower elevation. The borrow pit stops functioning. Now the groundwater starts going back to a normal level. You end up with a situation where the ponds are getting a base flow, and that needs to be included in the calculations. And finally, we need to know our exits. We need to watch for bowls. We need to watch for bowls, whether they're natural bowls where water collects or a created bowl like my bowl of Fruit Loops that I ate this morning for breakfast. And we need to make sure that those bowls have a way for the water to be able to get out. We need to make sure the pathway for that water to get out doesn't create damage. We need to also make sure during extreme events, how are the people going to get out of the neighborhoods and how are emergency services going to be able to get into the neighborhoods. But we need to make sure we need to know how the water is going to get out. In 5 minutes is what I promised you.
You did a very fine job, young man.
Impressive.
Very fine.
Any questions now or later?
Derek, you ready for questions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. All right. We've got John, then Jessica.
Just have two. One, I'd like to get a copy of the rainfall pattern report when it's done. I'd be very much interested in reading that. Secondly, as an observation, you touched on all the points that I have in all my research in this topic that are important that we didn't do in the past, so I appreciate that. But on slide 21, something I found and saw a lot of communities doing, especially in Florida, is now the use, and I know it's a bigger cost to start with, but making the roadway itself a drainage system by the underpavement being more porous crushing on it and using porous asphalt. So in fact, you get greater absorption capacity and moving the water on a different kind of piping system. So the roadway being lower than the property line creates a surge capacity when those bigger event rains comes that buys you some protection cheaper than some other mechanical approaches. Of course, that would put a burden on the developer, but the choice would be is do that or kick in more money to cover the operating cost of the mechanical solutions because they have an operation and maintenance cost over the long run. But I think we need to look at where that trade space is because in one case, the mechanical solution puts that long-term life cycle cost on the taxpayer.
Yes, sir.
And we just need, we're really trying to make these things contain then their choices, pick the choice that makes the most sense. We all let people do that, but the key is we shouldn't be asking the total burden of carrying that should be addressed. Maybe not all of it, because that's a lot to ask. But maybe the cost sharing could be differently. But I just think we need to look at that cost sharing capacity when you have to go to mechanical systems that carry long-term total ownership cost that we are currently paying on a very, very regressive stormwater management fee that's hurting a lot of people.
Thank you. Jessica?
So it's kind of two questions and then a comment. But so as far as on slide 20, the standards that you guys are implementing in just that watershed, are we doing anything similar across the city? Is there the same requirements for development throughout the city?
He's nodding his head. The same ultimate requirements are the same.
But they have
The preliminary requirements to get the planning commission are not the same.
Okay.
But ultimately, the development requirements are the same. Well, they're not the same. They are the regulations applied equally depending on the appropriate location.
Right. Well, so the follow-up question to that is, I mean, I understand that the development that's happening in that watershed is obviously a higher price point, so we're talking a lot higher housing stock, but you know, the areas that we're seeing development coming through in more of the center of the city, it it would make sense to me if this is a successful program there that we would look at implementing this across the city and saying to these developers, bring us all this stuff up front too, so we're making sure that we're not putting in a dense apartment or any home development that could be impacting the existing developments that are already there. So that was more my comment, especially with the last briefing and the Dewberry report and how stormwater or sea level rise is going to start impacting us as a city as a whole. I don't know if that's really a question, but I think if these standards are successful, we should be implementing them across the city.
Thank you.
Could I just address? I completely understand kind of the issue here, but John Moss said one time you have to. I guess we have to take into account what the risks are and what the public is willing to pay to mitigate those risks. Everything that you're talking about is going to add expense to any developer who is bringing a project forward, and at the time that they're bringing it for the preliminary, they don't even know if they're going to have a project or not. So you're adding a significant amount of expense that ultimately is going to be passed down to the homeowner. Somebody has to absorb that cost, and so are we willing to make housing even more unaffordable, which is what pervious asphalt and pavement would do, and what is what ultimately making new requirements on developers in different parts of the city that aren't specifically in what I would say is areas like the southern watershed that have specific problems. All of those things need to be talked about, and we need to mitigate, figure out what the public is willing to stomach.
Thank you, Ben. Barbara?
I couldn't begin to make all the comments that you all know I've got. But the difficulty is that we have different watersheds, and each watershed is different. I mean, it has a lot of differences. And unfortunately, I think we've been thinking that they were all the same, and they could all be engineered the same. When we get into the southern watersheds, we're at much lower elevations, we have much higher water table, and we have different receiving waters, which is big, because in the northern part, when you're talking about the Chesapeake, it goes out to Chesapeake Bay and then the Atlantic Ocean, and it's gone, and you've got lunar tides, whereas in the southern watersheds, the receiving waters are Back Bay and the North Landing River, and they are an entirely different system, and they're a closed system, and the only access out of those waters is down through Oregon Inlet, I guess, and that's a long way to go. Plus, with the wind tides, it's going to be back and forth from the Albemarle. So we're entirely different. And I think we're finally beginning to recognize that, and that there are differences that have to be dealt with at the very beginning when you're doing your engineering, because you've got to know what the receiving waters is. And the receiving waters in both of these instances are not in good shape for many reasons. And I just really think until we have got a lot more answers than we have now, that we have to be very careful about approving more development that may not work. Particularly we look at the situation of the wind tides, and yeah, okay, you might get it out to Asheville Bridge Creek and then into Back Bay, but if it's already full and overflowing, where's it going? It's not going very far. And I think really until we are looking at the entire system, and we've got a lot more answers than we've got now, I'm just very reluctant to say we've already got it resolved. We can, because we don't. And, it may be that we think we've got it engineered right, but until we get the next massive storm, we're not going to know whether it's engineered right. So I just think we've got a lot of concerns that over this next year with the Dewberry study, and I guess we're going to be going forward with the 31 basins, and we've got some of the basins, 8 and 9 or whatever those watersheds are that you're about finished with, but we've really got the rest of them too. But I think you also, and when you're looking at that map right there, you're almost looking at what is considered Zone A in our Know Your Zones escape route for evacuations. All that area down there is in Zone A, partly because I think most of the exits are going to be flooded. as we saw just this summer with the high wind tide and so forth. So you've got a really big area down there that's got a lot of issues that the northern part of the city doesn't have, and we really need to treat them as they are and not think that they are the same. And I think going back to the transition area plan to start with, what is the real carrying capacity? I think, we sort of pulled out of the air, 1 unit per acre, but is that really the carrying capacity? We know that the transportation plan didn't work. Yeah, we've got 2 CIP projects in the transition area, but there were many roads that were supposed to have been built by the housing, because remember, it was all going to pay its own way. That didn't work. But neither of these very small projects have any funding. And there are just a lot of issues. So I think when we're talking transition area, we want to identify all of these issues and understand them and not think that they're resolved at this point. And I think that's an important point we need to make. Yeah, you've made a lot of good points about the transition area, but there's still a lot to be worked through. And one of the big ones is the stormwater. And it's nowhere close to resolved.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, John?
I'd like to know, and I know I've kind of asked this question in a different way in the past, but as we pursue any of these plans and as we improve the intellect we apply to solving our drainage issues, how does that change the flood insurance premiums that people are paying today versus what they pay after we make whatever design or improvements that we make, because that is an economic benefit. That is part of the calculus. But I think it's important to know how would that be looked at differently, if at all. Maybe it's a zero impact, but I think it would be nice to know how would that property be assessed under the FEMA criteria, which you can look at their floodplain. After we had a plan and a different approach, how does that change what a homeowner would pay or whatever? Because that might get back to the special service district idea, which you saw in one of the reports. I think that was something Mr. Hanson mentioned. But I think that's a piece of the puzzle in terms of identifying that risk benefit that Ben talked about, which I agree with wholeheartedly.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for y'all's presentation. Very informative. We'll now move to the next one, Asheville Park Drainage.
So, Council, what you just got exposed to is the beginning of an education on, as Ms. Henley said, 31 drainage areas. And so we're going to ratchet up the conversation on this next briefing to present to you the results of modeling, a focused area that was significantly affected by Hurricane Matthew. We're going to show you what the science is presenting to us. It is attacking the issues associated with a major neighborhood and the associated drainage area that's connected to it. And we have spent a sizable amount of money to conduct the science and do the modeling. And we have exerted senior leadership to make sure that we are educating ourselves in the process so that we have a better understanding of how things are. And the result will be that going forward, we have a higher resolution in the conversation of being able to explain what the conditions are, and before staff makes a recommendation, that we have applied more science and more engineering than we've ever done before in any of the process of looking at approvals going forward. And so our senior engineer in the city is Deputy City Manager Tom Leahy, and he drew the short straw for the next briefing. So,
Tom, we're glad to have you.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. I have with me today Phil Davenport, Director of Public Works, Mark Johnson, the Administrator of the Public Works Operations Division, and also have John Fowler, our City Engineer, Tony Alger, C.J. Botner, and Greg Johnson of our newly formed Stormwater Center of Engineering. So we're here to talk a little bit about Asheville Park and its stormwater issues. Let's go ahead and go to the first slide, please. How did this happen? How did we get to the point where we need to make tens of millions of dollars of improvements into a fairly new subdivision? So in 2005, this subdivision, it was a 499 acre subdivision was approved. It consisted of 5 villages, A through E. In the next 2 years, Village A, which was the village that hosted Homerama, was approved and construction was initiated. Also, Village B was Rainier Village. The southern the southern village was approved, but that never went to construction because in the next couple of years the housing bubble would deflate and then burst, and so over the same period of time, the city would absorb the infrastructure that had been constructed, the streets, the utilities, and the stormwater system into the city facilities. Nothing much happened for the next several years, but February was a banner year. The beginning of the year, a new developer, HomeFed, acquired the properties that had been foreclosed on. About the middle of the year, they submitted and was approved for a new plan for Rainier Village. That went to construction. All of that, Village A and Village B, were working on the stormwater system and outfall that had been built initially back in the 07-06 timeframe. Then towards the end of the year, the city began to become aware of flooding problems, mostly at the entrance to Rainier Village, right in the middle of the 2 villages. And over the next several years, that would get more frequent and a little more intense. So obviously, at the exact same time, we began a dialogue with HomeFed and its consultant to figure out what was causing the flooding and who was going to fix it. I'll have to say that didn't produce a lot of concrete results. So in 2016, Public Works took the bull by the horns. We said, we will reverse engineer and model this subdivision. We'll find out what's wrong with it. We'll find out what needs to be done to solve it. So while that was going on, we got hit by the 1-2 punch of Julia and Matthew. They brought a level of storm to the city that has really never happened in terms of total rainfall, and created flooding that, in Asheville and a number of other places that was far beyond anything anybody had ever seen. In February of this year, we completed that stormwater model. So I'm going to turn this over to C.J. Botner. He's going to run you through the results and the alternatives quickly, and then I'll get back and we'll talk about what's going on in terms of the current development.
CJ, you gonna get this one done in 5 minutes?
I'm going to try to, sir.
I don't think so.
I will. Ms. Henley's asked me to slow it down, so I'm going to go a little slower on this one.
I'm kidding you. I hope you know that.
We hired a consultant, CDM Smith, who's doing the master drainage study updates to perform a analysis of the entire Asheville Park system. They used EPA SWIM, which is Stormwater Management Model Program. It's the gold standard for modeling programs. Most of the other modeling programs that you will hear about, PC SWIM, XP SWIM, are all based off of EPA SWIM. It is created by EPA. It is a free program, so it's not an expensive thing for an engineer to be able to acquire. The total cost that we've spent to date so far with CDM Smith is $218,000 to create this model. We used photographs and information from the neighborhood, photos that were provided to us of Tropical Storm Julia. We actually went out during Tropical Storm Julia and measured depths of water in the streets during the storm. We were going to use that information to be able to help validate and calibrate the model. You want to make sure the model is showing results similar to what actually occurred during the storm. In addition, Public Works we have 3 temporary rain gauges, tide gauges that we put out into. One of them is at Lotus Garden Creek off of Sandbridge Road. That unit is still there. We're monitoring that so we can track the information that Ms. Henley was talking about earlier to make sure we understand what's going on. We also put 2 in the ponds that are located inside of the subdivision, and we use that data to also help calibrate the model. We used Tropical Storm Julia since we had actual depths of flooding. We knew what time those depths occurred because we were out there measuring the depths of the water. And then when we ran the model came in with 1 inch of what we measured in the way of depths. So if we measured 25 inches of water in one location, it came in at 26 inches. So we were fairly confident that the model, which a copy of it's shown here to show you the extents of what we actually modeled, we're fairly confident that it's calibrated, it's validated, and it's functioning correctly. So what did we find out from the model? Well, we found out, one, that the outfall structure, which is over off of Flanagan's Lane, is inadequate. It doesn't let enough water escape the system into Flanagan's Lane. And when it starts backing up, it backs up in the neighborhood so that the water can't stay within the lakes of the neighborhood. Also, the receiving channel downstream, which is the ditch along Sandbridge Road that runs to Lotus Garden Park, it doesn't have enough capacity to carry enough water, so it also causes that water to back up. And then when you get the higher tides, the wind tides, that just exasperates the problem that's occurring. We also looked at the subdivision pipes of what was actually built, and we found they're inadequate. They can't carry the capacity that we thought they would. There's not enough sufficient storage in the lakes to be able to drain and let the pipes all drain into the lakes. When you get the higher water levels, it pushes the water back up into the streets. And then we actually took the model and for each one of the lakes said if the water goes in there and it's like it's draining straight down to the center of the earth, what will happen? And we found that there would still be flooding in the upper ends of the subdivision because the pipes were not large enough to be able to carry the water. So what we had CDM do was they evaluated over 25 different scenarios of ways we can make improvements to fix the system. And then they provided in their study the 4 most viable alternatives that would be able to solve the problem that's occurring out in Nashville Park. All 4 of the alternatives provide similar benefit. However, we want to stress that no improvement can provide complete protection against all storms. I will say that all 4 alternatives, we ran Hurricane Matthew through all 4 alternatives, and we end up with no flooding in any house in Asheville Park with the solutions that are proposed. All of these alternatives require major upgrades, including pipes within the streets of the neighborhood. Alternative D was the recommended alternative by CDM Smith. It's the most resilient against future sea level rise based on where the pump station is being sited and the outfall for that alternative. But also we want to note to you that alternative B is more conducive to phasing, especially the initial phases to be able to get a solution moving forward faster due to land acquisition and things of that nature. Well, I'm only going to show you the two of the 4 alternatives, B and D. Alternative B, I'm going to step over here for you.
Pointer right there, CJ.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I'm going to start at the downstream end. This is Asheville Bridge Creek. We would have, for alternative B, we would have to install an 8x10 box culvert up Sandbridge Road and up Flanagan's Lane and build a pump station with a gated control structure at the outfall for the ponds. This is all a canal that will connect all of the lakes together on this side of the road. I specifically say canal because it's 50 foot wide is the water surface elevation. So the water surface, normal water, 50 feet of water. We would have to build new ponds, 17, 10A, 16, and 2A, and then we would have to expand pond 6. In addition to that, all of the pipes you see over here that are in orange are the existing storm drain pipes. Everything you see in yellow is pipes that would have to be installed in order to fix flooding problems within the neighborhood to keep the streets from flooding on a 10-year storm event. For the difference between alternatives A and alternative D is we're putting a second outfall in as part of alternative D and locate the pump station here, which is a natural ridge in the Asheville Park. So it brings that pump station up, makes it more resilient against future sea level rise. You would still put a gated structure down here to control so the tide effect can't come back into the ponds. The pump station would be located here and would pump this direction. All of the same improvements we talked about before, but the biggest difference is we figured out with alternative D is we could run a system through here that would allow us not to have to rip up most of the streets in Rainier Village. Next slide. Of course, everybody wants to know what is that going to cost. Please understand these costs do not include acquisition costs, utility adjustments, or environmental mitigation costs. We're not sure how much wetlands would be impacted, so it's difficult to predict that at this point in time. Alternative A was actually the lowest cost at $20.1 million. Alternative C was $24 million, which actually would have pumped the water across Princess Anne Road towards Seaboard Road and West Neck Creek. The recommended alternative is at a cost of $21.2 million.
So as it stands now, the CIP and the budget the council just approved provides $9 million in funding, and that won't pay for all of any one of those projects, but it would pay for what we call Phase A of Alternative B. It's also known as what I'll refer to as Scenario 5. As CJ indicated, Alternative B was much more conducive to a phasing operation in which you could build part of the project now and then pursue the rest of it later. Under Scenario 5, there was a considerable decrease in the flooding duration. There was what we would call an incremental improvement in the depth of flooding. The cost of Scenario 5 was about $8 million. Both the neighborhood, Asheville Park Homeowners Association, and the developer indicate a desire to continue developing Asheville Park as long as there are certainly no adverse impacts to stormwater in villages A and B. Public Works right now has begun the preliminary engineering design of Scenario 5, so that just simply because of the kind of time and lead time these sort of things take. So Scenario 5 improvement primarily involves the pump station over here by Asheville Bridge Creek and the additional storage and the additional transmission through the canals to get the water from Village A and B over to Asheville Bridge Creek. Part of the problem is that this is a 2-mile long subdivision with blew that one. It's a 2-mile long subdivision with very little elevation change, and you're fighting Mother Nature in just trying to move all that water from the west to the east side. Now, all of the alternatives that Public Works evaluated assumed that villages C, D, and E would develop as council has approved them today under their current approved zonings. The Scenario 5 recognized that HomeFed has had some discussions and of increased density in Village C. And so they took into account the increased density in the increased proposed density in Village C simply as a worst case scenario, so that whatever council decided, whether that increased density ever even comes to council, whether council decides to grant it or not grant it, we didn't want a situation where you would say, well, what happens, will this work if council grants these increased densities? And so we did a worst case scenario. It would essentially work under both, whether you grant that increased density or not. HomeFed is interested in proceeding with Village C and cost participating in our Scenario 5. It's based on the additional costs that it would cost the city to move forward on Alternative B and in a phased approach. The cost share that we have calculated at the staff level is 71% for the city, or $5.8 million, and 29% for the HomeFed at $2.4 million. If HomeFed decides to move forward, and let me say at this point, Scenario 5 would not allow for villages D and E to be built. You could not build villages D and E without completing all of the phases of Alternative B. The cost participation we've discussed would require that HomeFed would participate in additional up to $2.1 million in future phases if villages in D and E were to proceed and the city was proceeding with the other phases of Alternative B. Now, in the meantime, yes, ma'am.
How did you come up with that? Were this split derived of 71 and?
They looked at the additional cost. We looked at the additional cost to the city by going to Alternative B and by going to the phased approach, and it was assumed that the developer had to absorb those. And there's also some of the work the developer is going to have to do on his own on Village C himself to make sure that that his systems are designed to a better standard than they would have originally been. They were originally thought to have been designed to.
Okay, I've got a list of questions. We're almost finished with this press. We'll come back and do that at the end if we could, please.
Okay. Okay, so where was I? Even the phase scenario, though, even if we move ahead with the phase one, it's going to take 18 months, maybe 2 years to complete that. So in the meantime, we haven't just ignored Asheville Park's problems. Public Works Operation is putting in an interim solution. It involves dedicating a 13 cubic foot per second portable pump to pump this lake system down and keep it down low in the anticipation. If we see a storm coming, for example, we know that a hurricane is on the way, they'll be operating this pump and they'll be pulling these lakes down to about 1 foot elevation. And they're also designing and getting ready to construct a larger weir that will let more water leave the lakes, both when it's not raining. It'll allow the lakes to drain down normally when it's not raining to a lower level, and it'll also allow them to dump more water when it is raining. And the weir they're designing will also have an ability to prevent the backflow of water from Asheville Bridge Creek, so that when the wind tides come up and the water comes up, they don't actually backfill and start raising the lake elevation in Asheville. And that weir is under design now, and it's scheduled for construction in January. So that brings us to the Pungo Ridge development. Okay,
I'm going to go ahead and ask questions on the first one if we could. Jim Wood, please.
Thanks. Go back to slide 8 for me. Eight. Oh.
8, enter.
So, Tom, on this outfall system that they're talking about there, was that the city outfall, or was that something the developer built?
That was what the developer built.
Okay, then go to slide 13, if you wouldn't mind. So out of all this stuff that needs to be done, how much of that is on the property that is owned by the various development entities versus city property?
Do you guys have an idea about that?
I don't think we have it broken down that way. Most of it is on Asheville.
Okay. The alternative D, there was some issue. Alternative D potentially involves Fish and Wildlife Service, so that's it's a pretty big unknown.
Right. So then that gets me to my question. Going back to kind of what Rosemary was asking was how we got to that cost split, because it would seem to me all of this work is on the property owned by the various entities that develop this, and I don't know why the city would have to cost participate in that degree. I mean, in theory, this entire thing was designed by an engineer who put a seal on it, right?
Yes.
And at some point, there was bonds issued for the stormwater maintenance and that sort of thing, and were those released?
Yes, and the bonds that were issued tend to be really, in terms of magnitude, were nowhere near the size of what this problem is going to cost.
Understood.
Those bonds were.
This may be a closed session issue with the city
probably
attorney,
is.
but the question is somebody designed this.
Yes.
Somebody, in theory, should have looked to see what was downstream and that sort of thing, and you know what, where the one entity may no longer be viable. I still think there's an issue with us having to pick all this up, and I think that's something maybe we need to talk about, because it just doesn't sit right with me.
Great. John?
Well, just as a refresher, you may recall, I did ask the city attorney, who did a thorough look at how we got to where, and was it bankruptcy, was it receivership, who accepted what, when, where, and how. I could ask the city attorney to re-share that with you all, but it did show how we got to where we are and how we were and were not culpable at various points to get us here. And the check valve on that pipe is closed, and I think we're at a sunk cost point of view, whether we like it or not. I think we are. I don't ever like accepting that, but I think that's pretty fair. But two things. One is an observation. One, this does show that if we had more money, we could move faster, a point I've always made, because it's money that's controlling the phases of how quick we move. Secondly, I hope, since some of these things are mechanical, talking about what we can do in the absence of, like pumping or whatever, I'm sure, hopefully the city manager is coming back and going to tell us likewise that the other affected neighborhoods, what we're able to do in advance of the capital projects when we know storms are coming, whether it's to move pumps into lakes, that we are equally addressing all the really grossly affected neighborhoods with those surge capacity capabilities with O&M funds when the time arranged. I'm sure you'll come back with that, because I think that leaves an optic that, hey, what about us? And, you know, those people, more of them had water in their home versus just in their street. So I hope we can do that. But on the B, and maybe this gets in the next one, and I'll just pose my question now and wait. But I hope when we looked at all these solutions, that we also looked, are there less mechanically intensive solutions that really exploit the landscape? And that might get back to something that Barbara talked about, that allows us to address this with, that work more passively than having to have high amounts of mechanical maintenance and moving water. Maybe we can't, but I'd also, if you could, I'd like to see a copy of that methodology on how you did the cost. I'd like to see it, if you have a paper or something on that. And if you could just share with me maybe some resumes past of other projects that CDM Smith has worked and where they in the state, where they've actually done projects. I'd like to just know what other drainage projects they've done, just see a little resume of their work. Thank you.
John, Barbara?
Again, I'll have a lot more questions for staff later, but just two or three that I really think I have to say something about now. I wasn't on the council in 2005. I think it actually had been approved before that, but there was some adjustments made in 2005. But anyway, I'm sure that when that was approved, that everybody who was involved at that time thought they were doing the right thing. And kind of that's what makes me afraid now. We might move forward thinking we're doing the right thing, but we really aren't. And we just can't afford to keep getting it wrong. And it worries me. You know, I hope we're not rushing just to do something until we really do know for sure. But I mentioned carrying capacity. You know, in the previous, when this was approved, it was approved for 499 units, 1 unit per acre, gross acreage, which makes no sense at all, but it was approved. Well, just because it was approved for 499 units at that time doesn't mean that 499 units ought to be built there now, because, but I know we can't take them away. We can't downzone. But, you know, I'm really not comfortable in saying, okay, they get 499 units because that's what was approved, and we're going to put in this system supposedly so it can handle that, largely at public expense. That just doesn't fit well with me. And it may just be that it can't handle 499 units on that property. Maybe D and E cannot be built, maybe even C can't, or certainly not increased density. I just think, again, we're not really looking at the total of everything. We're trying still to do things incrementally. And the downstream impacts really need to be considered. I don't think we can continue, especially in the southern watersheds, figure, okay, we get the water off this site and it can go in the West Neck Creek or it can go in Back Bay and we're done. That's not the way it works. We're not done, because those waters stay where they are and they impact the people downstream. And just to also mention, we had a lot of, not this specific, but on the whole drainage, as you all well know, you guys were there at my forum a couple of weeks ago, and it got to be so involved that it became apparent that we needed to stop and just have a special public information meeting, which I hope we can have within 2 weeks. We've had time now to get this data out, so that all of the affected people can come and ask questions and understand this, especially the downstream folks who are going to be impacted with this. You know, you talk about putting in that weir so that it won't allow the backflow. Well, if the wind tide has blown it up and it can't get through there, then it's just all going to back up if you're pumping more. I'm not sure. There's just a lot of other impacts that people want to know how they're going to be affected if we're curing something for this one development. And so I do hope that information meeting can be scheduled and we can have that pretty soon. because there are a lot of folks who are asking a lot of questions about how they're going to be impacted, not only the folks who live here. And I think in all of these developments, as we're considering new development, the stakeholders that are not at the table are the people who buy these properties. And we can't continue to build new development and just let some developer continue to develop because he's got this property, he wants to develop it, and then the next round of people buy their houses and find that they've got a flooding problem. We just can't keep doing that. And I hope we're not, rushing and really not looking at cumulative effects and all of this. And like I say, I really am concerned about, how much. I mean, I know that we have to do something for A and B. Those folks are there. But for additional development, I'm not ready to go there, especially until we know what we're actually doing and what all of the impacts are going to be.
Any other questions or comments before we move on?
I would make a response that, in general, back to members of council and the viewing public. The dynamics in the turn of the century of design and trusting a PE stamp and providing it to the city to accept that professional stormwater design has certainly changed as a result of Matthew and began long before Matthew. You can see that we did the modeling on this after a series, a year and a half of meetings that we had with the former engineering firm and couldn't get where we needed to go. And we launched on our own to create our own modeling to where I, as a manager, are going to reassure to the council that we have applied the best science and the best modeling that is available, and that our recommendations for making decisions with regards to development will be at a level of fidelity greater than you've ever had before. We certainly now own the issues associated with Asheville Park. I couldn't have put it shorter, sweeter, and more eloquently than Mr. Moss did, but that floodgate has closed. And we are moving on with the issues that we find ourselves. There are situations, and this is the lead into the next section on Pungo Ridge, there are opportunities by which adjacent development invests private money to improve the stormwater conditions that currently exist. What I'm telling you is the adjacency properties that Pungo Ridge is looking at drains into Asheville Park. 100-year storm floodwater drains into Asheville Park. It's going to drain there tomorrow if you have a 100-year storm. But if you make a decision to look favorably at a development, that private funding is required to handle and treat, but mainly we're talking about flood control and capacity, water quantity. They have to invest what it takes to handle that stormwater and convey it at no greater than it currently is. And so they remove that 100-year flood damage that is currently going to roll into Asheville Park tomorrow if and when that happens. And so we're not saying that we've designed anything for them. We're saying we're using modeling to say, these are the conditions you must meet, Mr. Developer, in order to be able to have a conversation about rezoning and to bring a proposal forward for consideration, both by the staff and ultimately for approval or disapproval by the city council. So with that as a lead-in.
But Jim Wood had a question real quick on you.
Well, so going back, Dave, I understand that, but Asheville Park was flooding before Matthew.
Right.
So, I mean, this is an example of, because I think, and John has mentioned this several times, is that, no matter 300 million, 500 million, whatever we're putting towards all of that flooding, that's not going to impact Matthew type flooding as we talked about, Windsor Woods or any place else. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that, and Tom's mentioned this, that we're just not going to be able to do. I think Tom said it fairly well when he told me, well, we'll clean out the ditches and they'll still be under 3 feet of water. You just be able to see the bottom of them. And that's the issue there, because you can't effectively plan for that. But when you talk about a future development like this, so right now in theory that's farmland draining into that. Is that right? Or
Well, it's runway and it's old bivouac foundations and roads and.
So who would design this? I mean, that's where it goes, because if you're saying, we can't rely on the private engineering to design and model it, does that mean then the city would have to pay to design and model it, and then the developer is going to say whether or not he's going to build?
It's a whole new level of staff review now.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
Asheville and Sherwood would not have gotten through the gauntlet that they'll have to go through now before we would before Public Works and I would recommend anything to you.
Case in point, there are 20 some odd acres of BMP lakes in Asheville Park. The guy sitting on the bench over here would tell you at a minimum they should have had 80 acres of BMPs for capacity to withstand that storm. And they would have filled up during Hurricane Matthew, and they still would, but they probably would not have inundated the homes of Asheville Park. They'd have gotten their streets. They would have affected the ability for transportation to get in and out of the neighborhood for a duration of time. But with 80 acres of BMP, it would have drained off quicker. The duration and the impact would have been much reduced. The creation of this model and the infrastructure recommendations forthcoming, because what you've got on the table today are the modeling recommendations for correcting this activity. Yeah, it'd be great to be able to put $40 million or $100 million on the table immediately. I couldn't borrow that much at this time with this, but because we don't have that flow of monies. But this is a very good interim solution that will, in fact, reduce the threat in that 100-year storm environment from preventing a sizable duration of time where the streets are flooded. And as Tom said, with this solution, Matthew would not have gotten into the homes, would have flooded the streets, would have prevented emergency vehicles from getting there, but a much less time than it currently was.
Barbara had a quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
Did that consider sea level rise, and if so, at what level?
We have taken into account future sea level rise 1.5 feet.
Not 3 feet?
Not 3 feet there. So that would cover 50 years.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
More.
One more quick question.
In the mathematical modeling, is that just a numerical output, or is that actually something that goes in and can give a geographical database representation?
We can actually show you where each node, one of those nodes was shown in the model. We can actually show you what the elevations are every minute for the time we ran the storm.
I would recommend that Barbara's workshop and all stuff, that if that's possible to export that on a site, that would be very insightful for people, because seeing goes much better than words.
Very good. Let's go get this presentation. We'll have questions at the end of this one.
All right, so there have been some informal discussions with staff and a developer. There's nothing been submitted to the city, but there is a development that is informally known as Pungo Ridge right now, and it involves, it actually is two potential developments, one on the east side of Princess Anne Road, best characterized as the western half of the old Pungo airfield, and the other on the west side of Princess Anne Road, best described as the northwest quadrant of the Pungo intersection. 47 of the 51 acres of what I'll call Pungo Ridge East already flows into Asheville. So that would be everything above that yellow line flows into Asheville at the southern end of Rainier Village. It is, it flows through a single 18-inch corrugated metal pipe. That pipe acts as a tremendous restriction to hold the flow back during storms. During a 10-year storm, and by the way, the storm that we observed just over this past weekend was about 4 inches of rain in about 6 hours, and that comes right in at about what the NOAA and National Weather Service would call a 10-year storm. It limits that flow to about 11 cubic feet per second. To put it in perspective, during an intense rainfall like that, rain falling on that area would probably be about 47 cubic feet per second. So it holds that water back tremendously. I would point out that the Public Works model says that in a 100-year or greater flow, that water backs up, it actually overtops Cayman Lane, and Cayman Lane would become a giant spillway, and it would just flow into Rainier Village in a greater than a 100-year storm event. We talked a little bit about impervious surface. The developer feels that the existing impervious surface is 40 to 70% because of the runways and existing building footings and some other concrete. Our GIS and our stormwater model calibration tends to suggest that it's probably more like 25%. We're not going to say the developer's wrong and that we're absolutely right, but we are saying this is a very critical number when you begin to start a stormwater analysis, and therefore you have got to settle on what the correct number is, and that would take an on-the-ground topographic survey actually figuring out exactly where concrete was and where it wasn't. So in our informal discussions, the developer has said, hey, look, this property flows to Asheville, but it doesn't have to. It could flow to the west across Princess Anne Road. I could flow south and west to West Neck Creek. And as CJ indicated, one of the alternatives we looked at for Asheville was to ship some of that water over to West Neck Creek. And as I indicated before, the 47 acres of the Pungo Ridge East that drains through Asheville, that's about 9% of the total Asheville watershed, so that's not a real big number, but it enters the system at a point of high deficiency. But again, I can't say this enough, that 18-inch corrugated metal pipe is a huge factor in all of this, and because of that pipe, when Public Works assumed that all that water would be diverted somewhere else, they just basically deleted it from the model, and then said, what are the flooding elevations and durations in Asheville? The improvements were small. They weren't insignificant, but they were small. They were also more meaningful when combined with Scenario 5, because the improvements from taking that watershed away from Asheville Park was in the neighborhood of 2 or 3 inches. The improvements from Scenario 5 were in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 inches in reduced flooding. So when you add the two together, you get something that's a little more meaningful. But by itself, without Scenario 5, the Pungo Ridge, removing that watershed, would not make great improvements in the flooding in Asheville. It's not a sole solution, but if it was implemented as has been stated, it certainly wouldn't impact Asheville, and it would have some minor improvements. So the developer also discussed, well, what if we not only took this watershed off of Asheville Park and took some of Asheville Park's water? We'll actually take some of the water that falls on Asheville, and instead of having to let it flow through that 2 miles of almost flat 2 miles to Asheville Bridge Creek, what if we take some of it for you? And you know, the A and B are the some of the lowest elevations in the subdivision. They're also the farthest away from the outfall. And if you take any meaningful amount of water off of them during the storm, it obviously makes some improvement. We believe it'll probably take a pump station, simply because our plan for Asheville is to have those lakes pulled down to elevation 2 or elevation 1. Public Works believes that the minimum lake elevation in Pungo Ridge will be 4, so you're going to have a pump to move that water up if it's going to work. But the point is, a lot of this is, it tends to be judgment, speculation. You've got to do the engineering and stormwater modeling, kind of like what Public Works has done for Asheville. The same kind of modeling has to be done for Pungo Ridge before we can tell you what's the benefit to Asheville, what is the impact to West Neck Creek and downstream and upstream of West Neck Creek, because it's, as Ms. Henley indicated, you can't just say we're going to take the water and move it across Princess Anne Road and dump it in West Neck Creek. We have to know what impact that has on the properties down there. So getting to that modeling, it has been suggested that we would cost participate with the engineer to get this work done. As CJ already indicated, we did the detailed modeling for Asheville, which included Pungo Ridge East in its current condition at a cost of over $200,000. We now have the modeling underway for what we call drainage sheds 9 and 10, which are the west side of Princess Anne Road and includes the Pungo Ridge West. That will be done by the end of the year at a cost of about $500,000. So this is an open source model. Our data and results and reports are available to anybody for the asking. I think our position is we are cost participating. We've cost participated to almost $750,000, and it includes those areas. The developer would just have to come in and put the details onto those sections for what they plan to do, subject to our review and approval, and then we would have the engineering and modeling that needs to be done. So our recommendations, and I'll end this here. We're recommending proceeding with Alternative B Scenario 5 and cost participate with home fed because that is going to be the fastest, least cost way to make some improvements for villages A and B. We would then use the unexpended funds in the Asheville Park CIP, which would be about $4 million, to go and start other phases of Alternative B, and we would look for the biggest bang for the buck as the model tells us, and we would start to implement those. We're going to go ahead and complete these stormwater models, which are already underway. And if anybody wants to get the results of those models, they're available, and we would remain open to cost participation to investigate if it's in the public interest.
I'm going to have a question, if I may. And it goes back to page 21. Any meaningful volume of water diverted from village A or B during a storm will result in flood reductions. At what point do you think you'd be able to scientifically or modeling, if something was presented to you? I mean, is this something in months, years, as far as the future, and would that result in saving money?
We were able in a matter of, I guess, a few weeks to turn around the results and say down to within a few inches what was the improvement if we took the 47 acres of inflow into Asheville away during the storm. If they could then, in a similar, I'm going to say a matter of a few weeks, maybe a little more, if there was a proposal to take water from the existing Asheville stormwater along with that watershed and get out and take it out of the system, we could tell you what the improvements in flooding would be, both in terms of a reduction in elevation and the reduction in the duration of flooding.
Would there be, and again, I'm not holding anyone to anything, would there be a potential for saving money from what has to be invested over on what already has been developed?
Before the developer for Pungo Ridge can sit there and say exactly what they can take, they have to model their sections and lay something out to say we would accept so much water under so many certain conditions. And then we need to see what happens downstream. But yes, we would be able to translate that. I will tell you, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to take so much water that it eliminates the need for us to make improvements because the pipes themselves
could the amount of
small.
improvements be reduced?
Well, it could be, but the pipes themselves are too small. So, as CJ indicated, they modeled one scenario where the lakes had infinite capacity, and there was still some flooding because the pipes and the inlets were too small. But yes, every improvement. But again, we need to see what the engineer and the developer for Pungo Ridge are saying we can actually take away. Then yes, we could tell you what that would reduce in our costs.
Right, John?
I'd like to follow up on the mayor's point. So if I have you correct, do you have a mirror copy of your model so it doesn't, people aren't impacting what you have control over for configuration, that people can then download from that mirror copy of your database? They can export that, they can add their manipulation, produce a product and ship it back for your review? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we provided the developer the model.
So there's a mirror copy. I think that's important. But if I also heard you correctly, if they did that, you're still looking at these basins 9 and 10, because that's where you're trying to see the downstream impact.
That's the western side of Princess Anne Road.
Right, but that downstream impact of any of these changes, is that correct? Is that what that works for?
We would have to know it would help us know the impact of West Neck Creek.
Right,
because
but you said that work wouldn't be done until the
end of this
the
year.
Yeah. So getting back to the mayor's point, I'm just trying to look at the sequence of events. Even if someone did this part, we wouldn't be in a position to really assess Barbara's concern and assess and model and look at what the downstream impact of that. So while you might have an answer in a micro sense, you really don't have the total holistic ecosystem look at that property until January of 2018, if I heard you correctly.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure I had the flow of that right.
Other questions or comments, please? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
All right. So, Mayor, we're going to move to our next briefing, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Well, I didn't want to hold us up for anything down there. I've asked Patty to provide you this kind of change. I think you guys have had enough stormwater for one day. So we're going to move our attention to Town Center. I think it's time for an update on where our Town Center TIF is so that we understand what we've committed to and that we have an opportunity to see how the financing is going with regards to our commitments and our investments. So Patty's here to do that today.
Patty, we're glad to have you as usual, young lady.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council. I think that, is it up yet? Loretta's getting up, but before we get, as we get ready here, I believe this is the first time we've really given City Council a briefing on the status of this TIF. So this is going to be new, I guess, to everyone. She's looking for it.
For the paper. Did you load it, Loretta?
Yes, I did. I believe that's it.
This brief.
You do have paper copies at your desk. And the first slide that we're looking at after the cover page is just a picture of the Town Center core area looking west. And, you know, I can kind of go into a little bit of the phases. You know, there's been a number of phases right now, and all of the phases completed, and the fifth phase under construction. There's 713 apartment units, 175 condominium units, 412 hotel rooms, 460,000 square feet of retail and restaurants, 800,000 square feet of office space, and of course the Sandler Center at 86,500, and then 4,350 parking spaces in this core area. So there's a lot going on. The next slide, that's not up there, but I'm on slide 4.
Thank you.
4. It's well, I flipped. Go back to slide 3. Slide 3. Slide 3, the district and the fund itself was created in 1999, so quite a number of years ago. And the whole purpose was to capture the incremental real estate tax revenues in this district since July 1st, 1998. This is an accounting fund. This is not a legal obligation fund, but accounting for us to track the revenues, the real estate revenues generated within this TIF district. Beginning in 2010, we also started to capture a portion of the hotel taxes generated from the 2 hotels within that district, $500,000 worth in the core area. And any briefing on the TIF needs to also talk about the special services district that's created. In the core area, there's actually a special services district that was created in 2002, and it pays for the operating costs of the garages. Remember, we don't charge for the garages to park there. The public plaza, the entertainment, the long-term maintenance of the garages. And in addition, it does serve as a backstop in the event that the TIF is short. And I wanted to also point out a very important fact that the additional real estate tax rate is 45 cents for those property owners within the core area. Okay, here's the boundaries. Now this, I always like to refer back to this because it is a big district. It's bounded on the north by Virginia Beach Boulevard. On the east is Thalia Creek. On the south, it is I-264, and on the west, we've got a number of roadways: Euclid, Independence, Southern Boulevard, Columbus. But you see on the map, it's irregular, but that is the district itself. This is a master plan This is from November of 2015, but it represents, you know, all the various uses in the core area only. This chart is a generic chart. It's not customized for this particular TIF, but it's used to illustrate what is a tax increment financing. And basically, the TIF, it's a method where local governments can accumulate the incremental real estate taxes above a base period. And in our case, the base period, this would be July 1st, 1998. At that point, the TIF assessed values was $151 million, and which is roughly $1.5 million. That portion still goes to the general fund today. And so taxes on the increased assessment that was generated as a result of this new development is used to pay debt service on the property, on the public improvements, which is basically the parking garages and other improvements. This is a snapshot of the assessed values today, and I broke it into two areas. I call this the taxable core, which is basically the special services district, the development that's been going on in there that the city has participated, or the development authorities have participated in. At that point in time, 1998, it was $20 million was the assessed value. Today, it's $447 million. The rest of the district was $131 million. Today, it's $412. You know, the sum of the district, as we said earlier, 151, almost 152 million. Today, 859. So, a growth of 707 million. And today's real estate tax rate, it's about 7.09 million. And let me do this. This does not include the value of the phase that's going on now, that's being built. This is a summary of the public and private investment in town center to date. And I'm going to just kind of walk through each phase because it helped me remember. Even though I've worked on it, Mark Warner has worked on it, a lot of the people in this room have worked on it. We don't remember all the phases. Phase 1, which is in the first column, was basically the original Armada Hoffler Tower and the Hilton Garden Inn. And the parking garages and the meeting space, plaza, staircases, and so forth was about $500,000. And those first two sections, the public parking garages and the meeting space connectors and land and so forth, are funded with debt from the TIF and supported by the TIF. The infrastructure, such as streetscapes, that kind of thing, is paid for either through the CIP or EDIP money, not through debt, not through the TIF-supported debt. So in phase 1, there was $29.3 million in public investment, and the private investment was $95 million. Phase 2, second column, was the Cosmopolitan Apartments, Dick's, and the block that includes the Cheesecake Factory and Bravo. The public investment there was the 18.1 for garages and the infrastructure of 7.7 for a total of 25.8. Private investment was $97 million. Phase 3 was the Westin and Studio 56. The public investment of garages was $16.9 million. Meeting space, connector, land, and so forth, $9.9 million, and infrastructure was $1.7 for a total of $28.5. The private investment in this phase was $173 million.
It's counted receivership.
There was no phase 4. That phase started but did not materialize, so that maybe someday that will happen. But we went on to phase 5. Phase 5 was the Clark Nexon building and the Encore Apartments. The public investment was of the garage was $20.1 million,
and infrastructure of 1 million for a total of 21.1, and the private investment was 84.4 million. In phase 6, which is going on right now, no public parking garage. There will be some plaza and some other support costs of 2.9 million, and then infrastructure of 1 million, a total of 3.9. Private investment in this phase is 38.4. So in total, the public investment has been 108.6 million over the 17 years, and the private investment is 487 million. So I'm sorry to walk you through that level of detail, but since we haven't done this before, I thought it was important that we kind of refresh everybody on that. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now, this is the actual TIF fund, and I know it's a lot of numbers, and I'm going to try not to go into too much detail, but the real estate tax, we're starting with 2017, and then we're making projections moving forward, and I'm doing that to illustrate why the fund balance is so important. Real estate taxes in 2017 was 6.71 million. The hotel taxes $500,000. Total revenues 721. When you consider debt service and the required meeting space reserve, expenditures are 7.89. So we have a short by 0.68 million. The cumulative fund balance was sufficient to cover that. So it's important that over the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years moving forward, there is slightly less revenue than needed expenditures, and that's coming from, and the difference is coming from the fund balance. Now, over the years, real estate taxes rates have changed, assessed values, there's been recessions, and maintaining a fund balance was very important to withstand the ups and downs. By 2022 and 2023, you see that they're about even, and by 2024, we start to see the fund balance jump up, primarily because phase 1 parking garage debt is defeased. It's over. It's been settled. So you know, the message is that we've conservatively estimated these costs, and we've been pretty close because of being slightly conservative to withstand ups and downs. This chart is a chart that we collect each year, thanks to the Commissioner of Revenue's office for doing that for us. But they collect and report to us in summary only what the other non-real estate taxes are generated within the core area. And I'm just going to pick on 2016. Business license revenue is 1.52 million. Business personal property, 7.72 million. Trustee taxes, 4.91 million. Remember, trustee is your meals tax and your hotel tax. And a general sales tax, 1.05 million. So a total of 8.2 million.
Does that include the $500,000?
Yes.
Okay.
It does. And then that note is here. $500,000. Estimated general fund portion. I know that certain council members like to ask how much of that goes to the general fund. And roughly 3.7 million of that, or 45% of that. This chart is just to illustrate everything you've been looking at so far. The green line is our debt service requirement. The red is our cumulative fund balance. So you can see how close they are, and in 2023 you start to see that we start building capacity. This chart is the debt issued in connection with this project by phase. So far, 89.7 million has been issued, and the balance of that debt is 57.7. So 32 million has been paid down, and these and roughly the 15 years that the debt's been outstanding. And for 2017, the debt service is 7.7 million.
I can't believe that it's been going that long. I mean, well, am I aging?
Okay, I'm speeding it up. This is the SSD fund, and here's the additional 45 cents of the real estate tax coming in. We've got some fines and forfeitures, operations and maintenance, transfers to the capital project fund for maintenance of garages. That is also maintaining a slight fund balance for the same reason. In 2017, the fund balance is 1.6 million.
So this is a separate fund balance?
It's a separate fund, yes. And that is, and when we start looking over time about the needs for the parking garage and, you know, their age, their needs and maintenance. Just as a recap, the TIF was created solely as a revenue source or an accounting of the revenues for debt service on the garages and other public infrastructure. We've said earlier, they're very close. They've panned out to be very close to what's actually happened. There is no capacity for major changes without significant additional private investment. So with that additional investment, there could be other debt. The SSD creates revenues for maintenance and capital reserve, and as we said earlier, could be a backstop to the TIF if needed. And so that is it.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments? Yes, sir, John.
On slide 9, just on the real estate line,
Yes.
does the year starting in 18 out reflect in year 18 the benefit of the raising the real estate tax we raised for schools, which also benefits the other pieces? And does 19 and out reflect and assume the adoption of the additional penny plus for the other part of the school tax? Does that projection show both those, or just the one that's been enacted?
Yeah, just what's been enacted. Yeah, we don't make any assumptions about the rate. And you know, over the years, and I know I don't need to tell you all that, but when we created this TIF, the tax rate was $1.22, and it went down to 119, 102, 99, and back up to where it is now.
Yeah, I can remember a time when we could have lowered it lower, but the vice mayor brought out it would endanger the debt capacity of the TIF, so we couldn't lower the taxes on residents because we had to continue to pay those bonds. I do remember that.
Down to 89
Yep.
cents.
Yep, I just remember that. But I want to come back to now slide 8 if I could.
All right.
And I only mention it because when you mentioned this big investment of the Weston,
Yes.
that, you know, people need that particular piece of property, all total in the condos, you know, took a major course correction, which has, to this date, if you talk to the real estate assessor, has not recovered.
That's right.
Okay, so I just think that people need to normalize and remember that.
Right.
And lastly, is this reserved for the conference space? Is that referring to the rebated meal tax for the ballroom in the Westin Hotel, which was part of the agreement, that until they reached a certain amount of money, they got a certain percentage of the meal tax back? That was part of the deal when we did that conference room. Or is this separate from that?
This is a contractual agreement that where the Development Authority funds a capital reserve for the conference, to maintain the conference space. I'm not sure what the other thing, Alex, I'm looking, we're not sure.
I do recall at the time there was something about on the taxes when they used the meals. There was something about, maybe that goes in the reserve fund, but something about the meal taxes in that.
Let us research that. That is not.
All right. Thank
Okay,
you very
we'll do
much.
some homework on that. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah.
A very good story to tell, Patty.
Thank you. Wanted to recognize Stacy Hirschberger, who pulled most of this together. So
Thank you,
she's
young
been
lady. I appreciate it very much.
Great help.
Way to go, Stacy.
Okay.
Thanks,
It's a Taco Bell on your map.
You going on with City View too?
We're on time. We're cooking on all 8 cylinders, Mayor. You have before you an ordinance. You have before you an ordinance today on City View. This is a follow-up to the term sheet that you approved, but we thought we would give you a back brief before you got into deliberations on your agenda. So, Ron?
All right, I'm going to let Ms. Finley, I hate to put you on the spot, run with conducting this part of the meeting. Because
All right.
Please.
Okay, Ms. Williams. Thank you.
Council members, quick overview here. We'll do the project overview. Changes to the term sheet since June of 2016. The developers and authorities obligation, and I mentioned about the Thalia Creek Greenway project. That's a benefit of the project. To orient you, Patty just briefed about the TIF. This is located in the lower southeastern portion of the TIF, where now Constitution Drive connects the intersection of Bonnie Road. The original City View master plan was adopted as part of a rezoning in 2005. which included the first phase, which was Midtown Apartments, which are constructed and 100% occupied, and the concept for mixed-use development at this intersection. The site plan for City View project now has evolved, and I'm going to walk you through each phase here, but it's 3 primary buildings, and then the project will set up the additional ability for a future development on the north part of the section, but that is not a part of your development agreement this time. The main structure is phase 1, is mixed-use 6-level building with 13,000 square feet of office, 221 apartments included in this, with 2-level parking podium parking. Previously, and I'll walk you through some changes here, but previously it was considered 2 buildings with a 7-layer garage. This is a more efficient design, and the garage will be contained in the center of it with the apartments wrapped around and above the podium park, and I'll give you some architectural images of that. The second structure from phase 2 is a complete office building across the intersection there, 24,000 square feet. And in both cases, prospects for filling the office space are imminent. In the phase 1, Ripley Hewall intends to combine their Ripley Hewall, RH Builders, and telecom companies in this office space. And then they have an active prospect for filling the other office space. The third component is a multi-level mixed-use building with a limited service hotel and then retail restaurant. In addition to the 126 rooms that will be developed there, the 3,000 square feet office are intended to house the headquarters for a regional hotel operator that is looking to bring the flag here. That's the project there. The architectural concepts and design input are looking at the multi-level, wrapping the parking on the interior so that it is screened with amenities for the residents at these apartments to be on the rooftop of the structure. In addition to the change of the number of buildings, or a reduction of that, what we do have is increases in the number of spaces in the garage. There were 2 garages in phases 1 and 3 contemplated previously. Now it's the 1 major garage at 2 stories. Major efficiencies gained in that, not only in the operation and people trying to find a space, but also in the construction. An increase in apartments, slight decrease in the office space in phase 1. The overall developer investment has increased just north of $45.5 million for phase 1. For phase 2, that remains unchanged. Phase 3, there's a shift in where they did have parking as a part of the limited service hotel and mixed-use development. That parking is out. There is some surface around it. The hotel parking is contained within the garage. They've increased the number of rooms and a slight decrease in the square footage of the corporate office space. So while the total investment is a decrease, that decrease is reflective of the investment for the parking construction, where they were able to achieve cost savings, but the overall yield in the apartments and the hotel rooms will provide more revenue on the output. Developer obligations are they develop and construct the entire project. Their total estimated investment, as I said, is just north of $60.5 million. They have to maintain and operate the structured parking, which is different than what we've done in the rest of Town Center. A portion of the parking must remain open for the public. At this time, they have communicated that they intend to reserve 310 of the 488 spaces, leaving north of 170 for public spaces, and that it has to, the construction of this must comply with our small business enhancement program. Of course, through annual appropriation to the Development Authority, which did approve this morning, the incentive payments from the TIF generated revenues will be for up to 25 years or $10.2 million in support of the parking, whichever occurs first. The payments commence after payment of real estate taxes on phase 1. We also have the right to terminate. Number 1, if the entire project is not completed within 72 months, or construction of the hotel has not commenced within 36 months of the completion of phase 1. And we have the right to terminate if no construction has commenced within 1 year of the adoption of this agreement. A component piece of the development agreement, as I mentioned, is a benefit for the continued expansion of the Thalia Greenway. And there's a construction easement and easement that are contained in this red box that are a part of that, with a consideration for acquisition by the city to the developer that owns the land for that public amenity. This checks many boxes for positive benefits to the city, to the area. No debt or maintenance obligation from the city, revenues to the general fund, advances opportunities of the CBDA. It supports the comprehensive and SGA plans. The Thalia Creek Greenway projects is in many. We do have the consolidation and retain local companies. It meets a economic development strategy for having a headquarters in the area. And then there are jobs associated, of course, with construction and the operation. As I mentioned this morning, the VBDA did approve this, and it sits now for you for item number H2 on your docket this evening.
Questions from council?
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm concerned about, with a lot of these public-private partnerships, how they get fast-tracked sometimes. And the Development Authority passed it this morning. Here we are being briefed, and here we are voting on it. And, Mr. Moss and I had a discussion. Where's the public engagement on, on this? And I guess my concern is that as we go to high-density urbanization, I think that's a discussion that we have yet to have, because it's going to change the nature and scope of Virginia Beach in a very profound way that I'm not as sure that a lot of our public is buying into. And I can say that, working with the public and stuff, a lot of folks have come to move here to get away from urbanization. And the thing is, I think what you got to realize that there's some laws of unintended consequence that comes with this type of density. First of all, do we really need more restaurants to go to compete against restaurants, especially restaurants in my district? Because that's essentially what you're doing. It's displacement effect. And so in a lot of ways, there's a zero-sum game, in terms of the advantage of it. When you bring density, you increase the cost of public service requirements exponentially, police, fire, schools, and, some other thing. Oh, yeah, when you get density, you got problems that trust me, it's a lot cheaper to live in Virginia Beach than Manhattan. They got all the density and public transportation you need, and it costs a bundle to live there. And, so the point is, though, I'm just reluctant moving forward now. I think at the retreat, we have to have an honest discussion about where we see Virginia Beach in the future. And the other thing is, too, when you talk about, any consideration to the impacts of traffic, the internet, the Independence Exchange continues to be a nightmare. You already have parking problems down there now. I still think there's a lot of questions to be answered. And, fast-tracking this, I don't think is in anybody's best interest.
Mr. Moss?
Well, my comments are a couple. One, I do think there is a process issue. I do know that we had a public discussion about the terms of agreement when we adopted. So no one can say we haven't had a term sheet and looked at it. But we are talking about a $10 million tax expenditure. That's $10 million that, if it existed, would belong to the public, which is us. So I do think they have a right. I know we got our package. Of course, I was trapped in an airport and didn't get home, but our package came on Friday evening. I'm sure the public wasn't watching at their computers waiting for that to pop at their home on Friday, and probably they have family things too. So I think there really hasn't had an opportunity. We haven't really given our employers the respect and deference they're due. They may not desire to comment at all, but you never like to consume your employer's decision space. That's usually a bad That's a bad habit at my work. I'm sure it'd be a bad habit at our work too. And I don't think we've given the public the opportunity to see and understand. They're watching TV or looking to come down and give us their thoughtful input. They haven't been granted the opportunity that they are owed. So that's a process issue. But now moving past the process issue, so I get my packet. I ask a number of questions which I think are germane as to whether or not there is a compelling public need such that we should be subsidizing one set of developers with their product over other people who receive subsidies. Cecil Cutchins at Olympia Development would be a good example. or any other apartment complex that we've approved. So I asked a number of questions, and I'll just share what some of those questions were. And they have not been answered. And for each year, this gets back to, is there a compelling and public need such that the free marketplace is not satisfying it that would justify the intervention of government to provide apartments? That's a fair question, I think. So I asked for each year, starting with 2010, how many new construction permits for apartments have we issued for permit, and how many apartments with each permit. So we would know that's total volume that's been built, because you can track that back to population growth and household formation and find out if we really have this huge deficit that demands public intervention. For each year, starting with 2010, because construction is not the same thing as occupancy. So now you want to know how many of those apartments really have had occupancy permits such that they're available on the market to compete, where they paid for their own parking and all those good things that we didn't pay for with the tax rebate. Then I said, for each construction, can you provide the assessed value, trying to look at, are they producing some higher value per unit apartment that has some over and above compelling value that the marketplace isn't doing? Haven't got that answer yet either. And then other questions I asked. Then reverse engineer, what's the total, the existing base of apartments that we had before the new construction in 2010, which you could do. Real estate assessors still answering that question. And those were dealt with apartments. So now you get back to this displacement effect. Unless you're making the case, which I see no analysis that does that say this activity in and of itself is driving an additional gross domestic product economic growth rate in our community, which is about 0.5 to 1% less than the national average. No one's shown that compelling case. If that's absent, that means any of the development that's taking place here is really a relocation, which Dr. Cook often talks about. You're relocating where the growth takes place. You are not, in fact, generating any net new economic growth. So now, truly, not only is the subsidy giving people a more competitive position for new stuff, you're really causing probably cannibalization of people to move here because of, you may get some better rent or some better amenity because they're getting the subsidy. Then it goes on in the justification from the staff, which didn't talk to any of that. It says that, well, if we don't do this, we will get normal suburban development. Well, that's what he's entitled to. Whatever he can do with that $10 million of tax rebate, he's entitled to. So what would the tax value of that be? Because that's the value you're going to get if you do no subsidy. So what is that? That's important to know. No discussion of what that would be. And then it went on to say, oh yeah, and if we got the suburban development, we wouldn't get structured parking. Well, you wouldn't need structured parking if you have suburban development. So that analysis has no merit. And more importantly, to get to Bobby's point, the public kind of said, you know, we didn't want light rail, you know? So you're still pushing, why a public subsidy? So I have really two issues. One is the process, which I think is bad and disrespects the people we work for. And secondly, it's just philosophical, which no one's surprised by my view. But I think at the minimum, in deference to the voter and our bosses, this thing should at least be deferred to our meeting so the public really can look. But I have to admit, the process wouldn't change my vote, so I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to be convinced, because philosophically I think this is bad, but the analysis is weak, to be kind, to support this proposal. No talk about displacement, no talk about excess capacity, no talk about what it does to those businesses. What's the really net gain in revenue over doing nothing? None of that is in this package, but yet it's being recommended. Poor job.
Other questions? Jessica?
Just a comment. I mean, I really would like to go back to, you know, I guess what Bobby and John have said already, but I feel like most of our citizens are similar to, I mean, not just me, but a lot of us on council, in that they have families and jobs. And for us to have a same-day brief on this and then have to vote on it, I mean, I find it to be completely unacceptable, frankly. I mean, and then on top of it, to do all the independent research, just try to get questions answered. You know, I know John sent a long list of questions to staff, and, you know, we got handed those today. But the other issue I had with this was, you know, again, going back to what the project would look like without an incentive, I think we have a right to know what the alternative would look like. Like, I don't think that's a unreasonable thing to say, hey, listen, this is what you'd get if you give us 10.2 million, and this is what you get if you don't give us that money. And then in addition to that, I also don't think that the parking that they're saying they're going to build is sufficient either. I don't know a universe where a family or a household has less than 2 cars. I don't believe, I understand they're only going to reserve 310 spaces, but there is no universe where even a single adult living in an apartment probably cohabitates, and they probably have more than 1 vehicle. And so I don't think the parking's addressed. I don't think that we were given enough time to vet this, not only with our constituency, but as individuals ourselves. And I will say that, yes, I'm learning, and it does take me probably longer than everybody else at this table to go through this packet, but I was a little frustrated with the same-day brief. I'm glad there was a brief, don't get me wrong, because I read this and I was like, whoa, because I generally read my agenda before I read the briefs, but that's kind of where I'm coming from. I know that already echoes what Bobby and John said, but I really did want to make mention that I don't think the parking is sufficient either.
Thanks. And I understand where you're coming from on that, Jessica, and Bobby as well. Just remind the council, we did vote on this a year ago initially. Louis and I met with the applicant just now and talked to them about, because what you said about, getting a little bit more of the process going and that sort of thing to kind of flesh it out a little bit, and they're agreeable to go ahead and deferring it for a short period. They do have financial obligations that they're going to have to do with respect to other entities involved with this. So Louis and I talked to him just a second ago, and with the council's agreement, we'd ask to defer it to the second voting meeting in August. And
I think that would be more than acceptable. And I thank you both for that initiative, and I thank the developer for their willingness.
Yeah. So and they're watching all this, and so I would expect them to reach out and talk to you about what kind of stuff you would expect. I don't mean to short circuit the conversation. I just wanted to let you all know that.
Well, we're going to move on to the next thing then. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see how you do with the Sports Center.
Inherited some good stuff here.
He's done a good job.
Okay.
Okay.
Different subject. Based on our conversation last week, Mr. Moss, we committed to you to bring back the scope of a PPA solicitation. We did take the official action to reject the PPA solicitation as we discussed, and now have prepared, which we shared in your packet, what would be the actual solicitation. It's a pretty simple one. The basic components we have for you here. Of course, the objective is that we desire to design, construct, and operate main indoor sports facility for the out-of-market sports travel for jointly also used for local residents for non-tournament activities as well, off of the tournament activities, and that this would be an enhancement. Yeah. Which we see in the scope of it is that there are key elements we're looking forward to in the solicitation. Program space, that kind of speaks to that baseline we've talked about what is it actually used for. So what pushes the footprint on this, of course, is desire for 12 basketball courts based on the Victus study recommendations, which can be converted to 24 volleyball. These are examples, and there's a litany of other program space elements that are in there. The support spaces, based on input from the industry, based on the study, elevated mezzanine and viewing walkway, site considerations. Of course, that criteria that we use, that it be co-located in the campus of the arena and the convention center, and in close proximity to the 100+ hotels that we have at the oceanfront, and that is a key element for that. Operational elements that an operator would work with us on the booking policy in collaboration on other events, and it can really complement the 3 key facilities that we'll have there. So process-wise, and Taylor's right here with me in case we need to pipe in on this, we mentioned that the timing for this and the benefit that we can gain is the first phase of a PPA process. If we release the solicitation at the beginning of August, we have the opportunity to put it out for 60 days. and then bring in those first proposals that give us concepts. We're not at detail phase, we're not at hard cost, we're not at the exact constructability, but it gives us the ability to vet the competition and the proposals, and it also gives us the ability to see what is the whether or not the arena has met its loan closing date.
I want to object to this process. We went through this last week in quite a bit of detail. This just gets the ball rolling. John, you're very active in that. Is this okay? One quick question, and we'll move on.
I noticed in the poll, it didn't talk about that the city would be buying back, that we'd be buying the facility if they built it. Is that not part of the, is that just anybody can say that or not? Or I didn't understand that was someone else would build
So
it, we'd buy it back and lease back. I'm just trying to understand, is that part of the process? Or are we reserving the right to build it, then lease it back ourselves?
All open
Okay,
scenarios.
good. All right, very
yes.
good.
Okay. Everybody good? Thank you very much. I got that. We're good. Okay. City council comments. We got about 20 minutes. We still need to do the agenda. Anything that's got to be done, please?
Yes, sir, I didn't want to steal your thunder, but I did want to compliment our city clerk for an outstanding job that she did on the Sister Cities International Conference that we had last week. It was incredibly hot. There was a lot of people from all over the world, and they had to dodge and move around and do a lot of stuff to get stuff done. But Ruth did a great job and was actually recognized with the, was it the Lifetime Achievement Award?
Yeah, give her a round of applause for that night. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I just, on my way down here today, I might have been late if it had not been because that rainstorm, but the light that went out at South Plaza Trail and South Independence, but there was two Tonley police officers that were there very quickly and set up and ran that and kept everybody moving, and that's right at the start of rush hour. So that just shows you when you have enough police capacity to have people out patrolling, that gives you the surge capacity to make those things happen, and sometimes you can take that for granted, but if you're stopped in traffic, you certainly will know it.
Jessica.
Anyway, just attaboy for them.
I just wanted to invite/remind everybody, my town hall is tomorrow at Kemps Hill Rec Center, and it's starting at 6 to 7:30. We'll have some staff there.
They're having it. It's the hottest,
Yeah.
most popular location in Virginia Beach right now, from what I'm reading. Yeah.
We were worried about the reservation. No,
I didn't get to see it yet.
I'm pretty sure that most of the conversation is going to be about traffic, because that's the issue I get a lot of calls and emails about. But we will also plan to talk a lot about the rec center as well. So, but
Very good.
That's tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Very good. All right, Mr. Vice Mayor, you're in time for the agenda review, sir.
Okay, under ordinances and resolution, just ordinances, it looks like you're abstaining on item 1, I understand.
And number 2.
And 2.
And you're going to defer 2, if I recall.
We're going to defer 2 to the second week in August, right?
I believe that's 8/15.
Say that again.
I think it's August 15th.
August 15th.
First meeting will be August 1.
Mrs. Finley?
Oh, he says second voting meeting.
On ordinance 1,
Should be the second voting.
we have a public hearing tonight on the sale of this excess property and declaring it excess. And at the same meeting, we're going to be actually doing that. And I really have a problem with that for a couple of reasons. That's really something we agreed some time ago we wouldn't do. But this, in effect, is rezoning the property because we're selling it based on it being rezoned to O2, and this person purchasing it, being able to build a 3-story building there. And I started about 2 or 3 weeks ago getting emails from the neighborhood in opposition to this, and I didn't know what they were talking about. I thought it was a rezoning that was coming forward, and then I found that this was city property, and I told them, well, don't worry, it's got to go through this excess property declaration first, and you'd have an opportunity to speak. But then I found out here that we were going to be doing them both at the same meeting. I don't think so. I'm not prepared to vote to declare it excess and go ahead and sell it because then the rezoning process would be just a sham. These people, I know that the applicant did attend the Civic League meeting, but We all know that civic leagues don't represent all the people in the community, not all the people attend, and I just really think these people who are expressing their concerns need an opportunity to let us hear them and then react to them, particularly since they are adjoining property owners in some instance. Putting a 3-story building next to a single-family home isn't something I think we usually do. So they haven't had the opportunity to go through the rezoning process and have an evaluation of the property by the planning department and so forth. So I'm kind of thinking this is not the process we ought to be doing it in anyway. The city ought to be rezoning it before we sell it. But that's another thought I have. But I think there are going to be people down to speak from the community that we need to hear, and then we need to defer it for a time. And do we have speakers? Okay. I'm just not ready to vote for it tonight.
We'll pull it then.
All right, how about planning?
Under planning, Starbucks Coffee Company and Stephen H. Burden Beach District. Mr. Ern.
I'm fine with that, Mr. Vice Mayor. Please.
Item 2, Scarlett, Don Wendley, and Derek.
I think we got a
Williams.
speaker on that item, on the second item.
On the second one?
Yes, sir. Let's
Okay.
just put it out there. Yes, sir.
On the
First one.
No,
Both of them, 1 and 2.
Item 3, Mohammed Rabbani and Guardian Properties. Apparently, there's a list of conditions that was not in the agenda that are available.
Yes, you each have the amended conditions that we're recommending for this for approval and not denial. We have spoken with the Rabbanis in regards to these changes, and they are in agreement with these changes. So I'm going to ask us to support approval of this as opposed to denial. With these conditions that you have at your desk.
Thank you.
Okay with the conditions, right?
So is that for consent then?
All right, and item 4, David C. Brosius and Nell Turner, conditional use permit, automobile repair garage, so forth, Beach District. Mr. Ern.
No issues with that, Mr. Vice Mayor. Consent, please. Yeah, I want to just get clear. So it's my understanding that ordinance number 1 is going to be pulled.
Well, do we have a speaker?
No, this is based on, yeah, we are going to have speakers for the sale of excess.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
In the public hearing.
Yeah. And then we got speakers for 1 and 2 under planning. Did I hear that correctly? Yes,
I think Ms. Henley wants it pulled so she can make a motion to defer it. Is that it?
That's under ordinances.
Under ordinances, yes.
Yeah, but where I'm coming from on planning, did I hear you correctly? There was someone speaking on item number 1.
No, not on number.
Then my mistake.
I just asked for clarification because I think what I understood, just repeat what I heard Barbara said is not just deferring, but ultimately her preference would be that this first and foremost would be a rezoning discussion on the part of our part. And then after that, a second decision about
Well, I
access.
think council should give that consideration.
That's right. I just want to make sure I understood what you were saying. Just
We
keep
can
it back
defer
on.
it.
I got it. I just want to
Is
make
it
sure I
gonna have to
understood
be
what
rezoned because it's sort of part of that Lansdowne Commons?
It's zoned agricultural, yes, it's
Is
gonna
it
have to be
zoned agriculture?
rezoned.
Oh, it has to be
You know,
rezoned.
for O2, and, you know, if we're gonna,
Coming to us before it's rezoned, out of curiosity.
I can't talk about this one. What were you going to say, Mr. City Attorney? Did you have anything?
I may be misinformed, but I understood that there was a speaker signed up to speak on planning item number 1.
But if she doesn't have it, we're going to go ahead and put it on consent until someone signs up officially.
On planning item what?
That would be
1.
correct.
We're going to leave it alone right now, though, because they haven't officially signed up yet. She'll let us know.
All right.
Okay. Do we have anything we've got to do?
We've got a few appointments.
Yeah, do we have to do them? We got 10 minutes.
Be nice if we could.
Okay. We'll do them.
It won't take long.
The chair will entertain a motion to recess into a closed session pursuant to the exemptions from open meetings allowed by section 2.2-3711A Code of Virginia as amended for the following purposes. Personnel matters, discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of any public body pursuant to section 2.2-3711A1, council appointments, council boards, commissions, committees, authorities, agencies, and appointees. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. Do I have a second? Do I have a second?
Second.
Call.
Second.
Third.
Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Gabbard?
Aye.
Mr. Davenport?
Aye.
Mr. Dyer?
Aye.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Mr. Kane?
Aye.
Mr. Moss?
Aye.
Mr. Ern?
Aye.
Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Wood?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Jones?
Aye.
Mayor Sessions?
Aye.
11-0.